waiting.
So, has anyone else seen this trailer?
You, Todd Howard! Elder Scrolls 6 is taking so long that we're just making our own. Except we're making it weird and unique like Morrowind was.
I saw it while doom scrolling on Instagram, as you do, and it seems like an interesting project. They come on a bit strong, but Nerve Lab Studios does bring up a good point with the Elder Scrolls 6. It has taken so long for the game to be made that people have been making their own Scrolls-likes, as we like to call them, and the Lantern of the Laughless Saint aims to be another, going in the Morrowind direction. There are more upcoming titles in this Scrolls-like category, and there have also been some released that have found some success. So I figured that today we'd take a break from deep lore dives and look at a few to figure out A, why they all seem to be coming out in the 2020s, B, if Todd and crew have to be worried about the competition, C, what has and hasn't worked for these Scrolls-likes, and D, if any of them are going to be able to make players move on from Skyrim. So, let's have a look at the rise of the Scrolls-likes.
But we're also building toward the game after that, and it's the one you keep asking about.
Before we get into all of that, we need to first define what a Scrolls-like is, a term that isn't from me, although I haven't heard it used too much. So this might be a little tricky. You might be familiar with terms like and light in reference to game genres, such as Souls-likes and Souls-lights, or roguelikes and roguelites. A Scrolls-like game would be much more strict to the design philosophies of the Elder Scrolls which inspired them, with the Lantern of the Laughless Saint, the trailer we saw from before, being a good example of a Scrolls-like, along with something like Avowed and Tainted Grail. All are predominantly meant to be played in first person, have vast open worlds to explore, are high fantasy, are pretty funky but not Game of Thrones low fantasy stuff that has dragons, but I mean they aren't doing this, are they? Then there are Scrolls-lights, games that have taken some inspiration, or rather a few aspects of the Elder Scrolls series, but largely remain their own thing. The Kingdom Come Deliverance series is a good example, with the first-person gameplay, massively detailed open world, and the way you can interact with NPCs. But it's also got unique gameplay, and you don't make your own character. You play as Henry, and what a man Henry is, not some malleable freak with a blank stare. It's also built around historical realism, not high fantasy elements. A high fantasy example would be Crimson Desert, which has the scale of the world, exploration, and ignoring actual plot and writing. So Scrolls-light, sort of? It has the feeling, but mechanically is probably a bit further away. Fable also looks like it's kinda Souls-light-ish with the customizable character and the way that there are over 1,000 named NPCs which can be specifically interacted with. At least that's what we've been told. Something that the Elder Scrolls series has always sported, but hopefully you can kinda see the problem we have with Scrolls-lights. A lot of fantasy RPGs could be ham-fisted into this category, but a line has to exist at some point. For example, The Witcher is not a Scrolls-light, and has sort of spawned its own subgenre, with the RPG Assassin's Creed titles being Witcher-lights, I guess. Still, with the Elder Scrolls series being as influential as it is, despite not having a new game in 14 years, and we'll get to that later, it shouldn't be a surprise that a whole host of RPGs have taken some inspiration from it, intentional or otherwise. But let's circle back to Scrolls-likes, and the intentional inspirations. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like we've had many Scrolls-likes soon after Skyrim released. After Dark Souls, there were plenty of Souls-likes in a 5 to 10 year range, and after Hollow Knight, there have been plenty of Castlevanias, including an actual upcoming Castlevania game and a Metroid one. And after The Witcher 3, a series as big as Assassin's Creed pivoted in that direction. We're getting Scrolls-likes now, with the Lantern of the Laughless Saint going so far as to call itself just that, but it's not the only upcoming example. Alcahest seems to take these Scrolls-like principles, with a bit of a Dark Messiah in it too, and Fatekeeper, while seemingly more linear, has also garnered Elder Scrolls comparisons. Last year alone we got 2 titles, Tainted Grail and Avowed. So there are plenty of potential usurpers that Bethesda have to look up for. But should Todd be worried? Should our Lord and Saviour be concerned that these indie devs or Obsidian might be coming for his throne? Well, that all depends on a factor we don't quite know yet, but let's have a proper investigation based on what we know thus far.
But it is one thing to talk of becoming Emperor, and quite another to actually be the Emperor.
So let's take a cursory glance at a pair of Scrolls-like games that came out in 2025 and one that came out in 2024. Avowed, Tainted Grail, and Dread Delusion, and explain why, despite not being failures by any imagination, they aren't exactly breaking the Bethesda stronghold. I would personally argue that Tainted Grail has been the biggest success of the 3, relatively speaking. But that relative success is the reason why it never really had a chance to become the new Skyrim. It has often been labelled as Indie Skyrim. In fact, when I search up Indie Skyrim, Tainted Grail was the first thing that comes up on YouTube, and while it has been very well received and its Steam numbers are pretty healthy for an indie title, it's not causing massive waves in the wider gaming scene. It might be a similar case to Kingdom Come Deliverance in that KCD1 did well for the scale of the studio, but once Warhorse worked out the kinks and refined the game, KCD2 became a mega success and one of the brightest sparks of 2025, which says a lot considering how strong last year was for games in general. I know that Tainted Grail isn't the first game in that universe, but from what I can see it is the first Scrolls-like. So, who knows? Perhaps a sequel could make a much stronger impact in the future, especially because I think Tainted Grail was pretty good. I don't have a lot of time for games nowadays, but I played the demo and thought it was neat. It was definitely an upgrade visually and gameplay wise on Skyrim, or at least vanilla Skyrim. The Arthurian legend setting also gives the universe lore that players can attach something to. Of course, it's a twist on that setting, but it gives players something to immediately latch onto and doesn't require you to well build from the ground up to catch up to something like the Elder Scrolls. So, well done, Tainted Grail. We'll watch your career with great interest. An even more indie example, and by that I mean more stereotypically indie, is Dread Delusion, feeling a lot like Morrowind with this retro aesthetic, perfect for an indie development team. I'd even argue that the visuals are very much PS1 era. One of these Steam reviews even draws comparisons to Skyrim, but let's be clear, this game is wackier than Skyrim by quite some margin. It's not Morrowind wacky, very few things are, but it does have that feel about it and probably shows how niche the Elder Scrolls series was, because gaming itself was niche back in the early 2000s. I don't think you can do a game this niche with a retro aesthetic and have AAA success. But you don't need to have a level of wider success if you're in your indie lane and there are enough people enjoying your stuff to keep going. That's what Dread Delusion seems to have done for lovely Hellplace, the developer, and has very positive reviews on Steam. Again, this is a strong performance for an indie game, but it doesn't have AAA appeal or the tools for AAA success, especially not to be something as grand as an Elder Scrolls killer. So let's move on to a AAA studio, one that had a lot of people thinking the Elder Scrolls would finally have some actual competition. The final game I want to talk about in this section is Avowed, and well, hopes were initially very high when it was first revealed. It wasn't the same as Tainted Grail, which kinda just snuck up on people and slowly gathered momentum. You see, Avowed was made by Obsidian, who have been linked with Bethesda and have a reputation for doing what they do but better ever since New Vegas. Obsidian isn't that studio anymore, but neither is Bethesda, since both have lost a lot of their top brass developers who built the reputation that both studios enjoyed in their prime. Avowed kinda proved this, and let me explain why. You see, everyone saw Outer Worlds as a kind of Fallout-like game, but in space, and thought that Obsidian was, more overtly, going for the Elder Scrolls throne that had been pretty dusty, with Avowed, but it soon became clear that Avowed would not be that game. This was partially a choice by Obsidian. Avowed itself is based on a CRPG series called The Pillars of Eternity, and seems to have been designed with a smaller scale in mind, with the open world not quite being the size you'd expect many RPGs today. It wasn't going for that Elder Scrolls, Witcher or Crimson Desert scale. This seems to be to keep the budget lower, since I don't think it had that 200 million plus budget of something like Spider-Man or Assassin's Creed Shadows. But this showed a lack of ambition behind the project, and by its very nature was never going to be something on the scale of Elder Scrolls. This lack of ambition is what led to the initially divisive reception of Avowed, and as someone who played it, I kinda don't see the point of it. Okay, that's very harsh, and I don't think it does anything badly per se, but I don't think it does anything that well either. It's fine, it's okay. It's like the brown bread of RPGs. It's a solid 6 out of 10 title in my opinion, better than a mediocre 5 out of 10, but doesn't really make much of an impression, at least for me. I played it for a few hours when I had Game Pass for a month, but I remember next to nothing about it, and I ended up moving on to Oblivion Remastered and then Clair Obscur pretty quickly after. It's competently made, but with all the games that 2025 gave us, this was not enough, and I think Avowed did alright sales-wise, at least well enough to get Obsidian to think about doing more with the game as a series, but again, is not going to be a Skyrim killer or successor. It kinda got swept under the rug in 2025, although, to be fair, look at the games we got last year. And that's without GTA 6 too. So why don't we have a gander at some upcoming titles, and see if there will be a Rising Scrolls-like to actually be the next Scrolls.
And remember my words, this burden is now yours alone. You hold our future in your hands.
Since the Lantern of the Laughless Saint is the reason I'm making this video, and I'm not sponsored, let's look at it next, and just call it the Laughless Saint, else I'm going to sprain my tongue. Now this is an overtly indie game, and even looks like one. The intention seems to be to emulate the weirdness of Morrowind, both mechanically and visually, with the visuals helping to make the game in that indie budget, but will probably also keep the Laughless Saint from being Skyrim level. Still, it's a neat project, and as the developers have said, the Elder Scrolls 6 is taking so long that you're better off making your own. That's what people are doing with the Skyrim modding anyway, but the Laughless Saint has got the chance to be quite a big thing if it pulls off everything it says it will, at least for an indie RPG. You can tell from its pretty angry trailer that the marketing team, at least, understand what many who are long-term Scrolls fans or knee-deep in the lore want. A weird RPG with a bunch of funky stuff going on and a lot of freedom, and while this makes this game more niche, it's a strong dedicated fanbase to aim for. Plus it's got co-op, which is something I've wanted from loads of RPGs for a long time, especially an Elder Scrolls game, and it's going for an achievable target as an indie game. However, this does mean Skyrim level success is probably off the cards. Could it be more of a Hollow Knight-esque success, where people in the gaming industry know about it, but those in the wider scene kind of don't really know what's going on? Maybe, but what about a game going for that AAA look, even if it doesn't come from a AAA developer? Well, that leads us to Alcahest, a game made in Unity 6, although it does kinda look like an Unreal 5 project. It looked so good in its initial trailers that people thought it was fake. Well, the game would technically be real, but the trailers made people think all the footage might be pre-rendered just to get people talking, with a maybe similar situation to the Watch Dogs E3 trailer back in the day. It should also be noted that Alcahest started full development in 2023, after the team got funding, and the team currently has only 38 people. That is a very, very small team for the scale of the project they're going for. The team also mentioned The Witcher, Dishonored and Dark Messiah, Might and Magic as inspirations, which might make Alcahest more of a Scrolls Light than a Scrolls Like, but we haven't seen that much of it, especially with how its world functions. With a team as small as the one behind Alcahest, there is a chance that this is too good to be true. There's too much ambition for what the studio has the capability to actually make. I think it being fake straight up, as some have said, probably isn't true because it's pretty hard to get away with that, especially with Steam's refund policy, but it might not end up being as good as we're led to believe. Then again, we could have another clear obscure Expedition 33 on our hands, where a small development team breaks both records and minds, and that kind of success could end up making Todd and crew sweat. But as great as the prospect is, I do advise keeping an eye on Alcahest if you're a Scrolls fan, but it's a pretty unknown factor with a long wait time. The Dark Messiah inspiration with a Witcher open world does intrigue me though, and we've seen more of this project than we have of Elder Scrolls 6. So I think it's safe to bet that Alcahest comes first, but let's address the elephant in the room, the Elder Scrolls 6.
Dagoth welcomes you, Nerevar, my old friend. But to this place where destiny is made, why have you come unprepared?
The rise of Scrolls-likes can be seen as a potential problem for Bethesda, rather than something to boost this subgenre as a whole. The situation is unlike what you get for Souls-likes, since From Software has maintained a steady stream of game releases while also maintaining quality. I mean, if you look since 2019, the studio has managed 2 Game of the Year winners in Sekiro and Elden Ring, while others are giving From Software healthy competition with a banger like Lies of P, and that's just one example. This isn't the case with Bethesda and the Elder Scrolls because there hasn't been a mainline game since 2011. It has been 8 years since the Elder Scrolls 6 trailer, and we have seen nothing. The problem with seeing nothing is that all expectations for the game thus far are up to interpretation. This can be a dangerous thing, since there is nothing to latch standards onto, and that also means there's nothing to stop these standards from rising as time goes on, especially with a studio the size of Bethesda, which can be quite unfair. This happened to Cyberpunk 2077, and while the game eventually became what everyone hoped it would, and props to CD Projekt Red for that, but also screw those guys for breaking this promise and releasing the game in the state that they did. I'm willing to forgive, but I'm not necessarily willing to forget. But let's get back on topic. The Elder Scrolls is going to become a larger prospect as time goes on. The same thing happened with Hollow Knight Silksong. The series itself got bigger as delays kept happening for Silksong, and that launched as basically the biggest indie game ever. And it's kind of what is happening with GTA 6, although with a bit of an asterisk. It's Rockstar, anything Rockstar makes is going to be huge. And after GTA 6, I feel like we're going to get the "we got X before GTA 6" meme will just shift to the Elder Scrolls 6. And this memeing will only make the game bigger to the mainstream audience. Now, this channel is pretty niche, and we go into the wacky side of Elder Scrolls here. While I consider this to be the core of the Elder Scrolls fanbase, and I don't just mean this channel, I mean loads of the YouTube community on Scrolls content, who are more aware of Bethesda's current state, this is the deep core, and the wider mainstream audience is probably going to buy the game when it comes out because its release will be an event. Loads of people bought Starfield. I don't know, Starfield has its fans, but I kind of view it as I do Avowed. It's not a bad game, it just doesn't leave much of an impression on me. And you can kind of see that in the way that the game sold and its Steam performance. A bunch of people played it initially, loads and loads of them, but its drop off in players has been massive since release. And currently it doesn't even have as many players as Skyrim does. It all felt a bit too safe, and also felt like it was missing that Bethesda charm of picking a direction and knowing that there is going to be something interesting around the corner, no matter the direction. I think The Elder Scrolls 6 is too big an event, let alone a game, to fail sales-wise, at least in the first, let's say, couple of weeks or month. It has been on too many people's lips, and it doesn't matter how many people badmouth Bethesda before it comes out, not enough people will see that to stop it from selling, and until then, I'm not sure it's possible to take Todd's throne until after its release. But what about after? In, I don't know, 40 years? Is that being generous?
The eldest is no more, he who came before all others, and has always been.
Signs are The Elder Scrolls 6 won't be a generation-defining game. A lot of the top brass developers and world builders, like Kurt Coleman and Michael Kirkbride, aren't around, and there have been interviews from former employees suggesting that Todd Howard, despite all the grief we give him, doesn't really have the time to get hands-on with games anymore, because he's being pulled in every direction under the sun. Starfield showed a decline in ambition, in my opinion, and some odd choices with the procedural mechanics, leading to some places feeling empty. It has improved since its release, and has some really good looking Narn. Look at it. Why does it look so good? What's up with that? But if this trend continues, then The Elder Scrolls 6 might not live up to the hype. And if it isn't at least an 8 out of 10, it will probably hurt the prospects of the Elder Scrolls series going forward. This could open up room for a Scrolls-like game to take the helm post-release, if a bunch of people don't stick with the game after the first month-ish. Since it's clear that plenty of developers are willing to make these kinds of games. However, Todd and crew still have one major factor on their side: the modding scene.
Reality is often disappointing. That is, it was.
I have played plenty of games with strong modding scenes, and have visited Nexus far more times than I care to count. Baldur's Gate 3, Mount & Blade Warband, The Witcher 3 to name a few, but none have the modding communities of Bethesda games in my opinion. My god, the things that people can do in these games. I mean, for instance, just look at my game. This is a game that came out in 2011, and just look at it, I've got so many mods in this thing, it might as well be a different game. I've also played Fallout London, and that is literally a spin-off made by the community, using the same engine that made Fallout 4. I know there are plenty of people who still play vanilla Skyrim, and I commend those people, but I also think that mods are an immense factor for Skyrim and Fallout 4's continued reign, especially with Skyrim. If The Elder Scrolls 6 isn't this incredible generation-defining RPG, but has a great skeleton and another creation kit that lets people do practically whatever they want, that's probably enough for the community to latch onto it for years to come, over a better game in the same genre. I mean, I would like to say that I'm not gonna play The Elder Scrolls 6, or at least not give Bethesda that much money, if it isn't up to my expectations, but if I'm honest, that's probably not going to be the case. If it just is alright with a great modding scene, and I can just come back to it a year or two later, that's probably enough for someone like me. And I'm not really sure that's fair. Plenty of people have made the argument that Bethesda get away with letting their community do all the work, but they've also given their community the tools to do so much with their games, so it's not like they're literally doing nothing. They sometimes try to make a quick buck out of them too, which, I mean, stop doing that, Todd. Stop being a naughty lad. But it's so difficult to catch up to a community that has been modding games for literal decades if we look at the likes of Oblivion and even Morrowind. So, can Scrolls-likes take over for the Elder Scrolls? I'm not so sure. I'm even saying that 80% chance of no. But they can go alongside and make people point at Bethesda demanding they do better. that is certainly on the cards. I mean, we're already seeing a bit of this with Tainted Grail, and as more of these Scrolls-like come out, we'll probably get it more until the Elder Scrolls 6 eventually releases, if that's even real. Hell, Elder Scrolls 6 might not even free us from the grip of Skyrim, especially with massive modding projects like Beyond Skyrim looking to make all of Tamriel. I mean, literally all of it. Imagine a continent-sized RPG. Well, if that ever comes out too. Oh man, it's a lot of waiting. I'm gonna look like a raisin at this rate.
For thousands of years I lay dormant. Who has disturbed my—
Hey, best buddy!
Oh, it's you.
The final point I have is that there seems to be a bit of a fear to really go after Bethesda and make a Scrolls-like game that can actually rival the Elder Scrolls in terms of legacy and scale, at least from those with the cash. Obsidian theoretically had the tools to do this with Avowed, but chose to go to a smaller scale. And as good as many indie games are, it's not easy to try to go that big if you haven't got big money too. Now, as far as Obsidian is concerned, this could be because of Xbox, who own that studio and Bethesda, and they don't really want to water down a potentially massive cash cow with the Elder Scrolls 6 if it ever comes out. Also note that a few have speculated that Starfield cost around 200 million, and that's not unheard of when it comes to AAA games. There's a reason why people were shocked when Expedition 33 revealed its $10 million budget, and while that's a miracle for what was produced, it's also still really pricey for an indie title. To go that big, and I'm talking Elder Scrolls 6 big, you would need investors who really think a project with the style and scale of the Elder Scrolls will make bank, as in Elder Scrolls 6 levels of bank. And that doesn't seem to be the case yet. Sure, Crimson Desert, Fable's Revival, another Witcher, and apparently a Lord of the Rings game prove that people still want to put massive amounts of cash behind high fantasy RPGs, but to specifically make a Scrolls-like game at that scale and budget when everyone is already waiting for Elder Scrolls 6 is probably quite a tough pitch, especially to executives who aren't the most imaginative.
Got to have money.
Maybe Alcahest has that much cash behind it. It really does look exceptional thus far, but we're also at the point where we don't know enough about it. So the world might be smaller and a denser one that isn't the size of what we would expect from the Elder Scrolls 6. I haven't mentioned Fatekeeper much either, because that is specifically non-open world. So for now, unless you want to go back to that more retro Morrowind-esque style, graphics and all, we may have to all hope that the Elder Scrolls 6 is good. I've got my fingers crossed. Or, you know, you could just mod Skyrim again. Thanks for watching. I wanted to take a break from lore, but don't worry, we're back at it again next week. If this is the first video you've seen of mine, hello. This isn't usually the norm for me, but if it does well, I might sprinkle some of these kinds of videos in every now and then. So maybe stick around if you liked it. If there are any Scrolls likes or even Scrolls lights that I didn't mention and you want to talk about, flood my comments, let people know, spread the word. I'm always on the lookout for games to scratch that Skyrim itch, but in the meantime, please do the like, comment and subscribe YouTube ritual to appease the AI overlords forever watching over us. And hopefully I'll see you in another video.
And so the pack was born again as the Wolves of Jorrvaskr, to rule in life and serve in death as the moonlight's bound hunter. And so the pack was born again as the Wolves of Jorrvaskr, to rule in life and serve in death as the moonlight's dark hunter.